Erin, welcome. It's so good to see you. And today's conversation, I know, is going to be a really interesting one. Especially, I'm really looking forward to listening to what you have to say. And you have had a big milestone recently, a 3-year milestone. And I kind of want to leave it at that and let you expand on what that milestone is, and maybe we'll then go on to some free-flowing conversation on that.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I absolutely love having conversations about this topic in particular. And when we booked this conversation, I didn't even really put two and two together that we were talking the day after my 3-year milestone. And so I won't leave the listeners in the dark too much longer. So 3 years ago, so this is March 2nd that we're recording. On March 1st, 3 years ago, 2018, I had a major surgery. And the major surgery was, I guess you could say, optional in some ways, but not really optional in the world. And that's because I decided to have top surgery, and to be more exact, a double mastectomy with chest masculinization. And that's a scientific way of saying that I decided to make my mind, body, spirit, heart, all of it aligned. And that's because I identify in this gray zone of what's called non-binary gender. And what it means is my whole life, I didn't know what gender I fit into. There's these boxes, right, that we were born into. And I remember being 5 or 6 years old and thinking, wait a sec, I like basketballs and I like sports and I don't like dresses and I don't like feminine things. Was I supposed to be a boy? Um, and then also being like, well, I don't really want to be a boy. But I really don't feel like a girl. And I want to distinguish because it sounds like very tomboyish. It's more than that. But that was what my 5-year-old understood. And so I spent years and years and years of my life feeling like I never fit into a box, but not having language for it, knowing that I didn't really want to transition to being a male, but also looking at my female body and saying, this isn't right. And really looking at my female breasts and saying, these don't fit. I had size D's, which were pretty big for me. And you can see me on video. Like, I'm like a pretty thin frame, and it just, everything looked weird. And so I grappled with this for 10 years. 10 years of what if I do? What if I don't? All this. And then when we can go into more of the story, I finally made that decision. I chose myself. And in 2018, I was fortunate enough to have a company that paid for that surgery for me and paid for me to have some time off. And so I did it. And it feels like a birthday to me because I woke up in my body for the first time and went, oh, yeah, this is me.
Gosh, congratulations. I mean, what a
Thank
huge
you.
step to take. And I want to go back to when you were 5 and you were talking about, you love things that boys traditionally liked. And I'm just curious to know whether if we lived in a world where we didn't have, girls wear pink and boys wear blue and these very clear sort of labels on what boys and girls are meant to be doing. If you didn't have that, would you have felt differently? Or was there a really clear sense, even at that young age, that you were not in the right body?
I don't think I knew at that point I was not in the right body, but that was also before puberty, right? So that body, in some ways, is very close to what I have now. I do think, though, that the societal, constructs around gender are just really detrimental to kids. And you said pink or blue. What most people don't know is that at one point, blue was associated with girls and pink was associated with boys. And yet we have it in our heads that there's these really natural dichotomies, right? And that most girls are going to naturally gravitate towards pink. And so we should just reward that. That's not true. It's so early on in our childhood that we get socialized into certain genders. And I was lucky enough that my parents didn't force anything on me. They let me be me. They loved that I played basketball. Until middle school, I could be seen walking around in sweatpants and, gym shorts and jerseys and all that. It wasn't till puberty started to hit. And I don't want to confuse sexuality and gender, but really that confusion started a lot when, oh, now you're supposed to like boys, right? And now you're supposed to act like a girl. And so getting really confused around, okay, well, at the time I also was grappling with, well, what is my attraction to other people? And they're different, but they're intertwined. And so, yeah, I think if there had been much more flexibility and leeway and not the bullying that came with being more of a quote unquote tomboy, I might have had more of an inkling. But I didn't even think about until college that there was anything that I could do about it, because really, even when I got into college, so 2002 is when I started college, it was still not okay to be gay. So let alone go down the path of transgender. And then transgender had this very specific, you go from one to another, right? And I had a friend in college, actually when I was in my first year of grad school, who had transitioned, and I adored being around him, and I adored learning from him, and he taught me a whole lot about gender, but I knew I didn't want to transition. And so that just left me in that state of confusion of, oh, well, I don't want to change to that, but I don't like where I'm here. And so that was the place where I started to dive into, well, what is gender and what are these societal constructs and what is sex? Because there's a difference between sex and gender, and science has a lot more understanding of the fact that there are multiple ways that sex is not binary. But
sex, when you're talking about what the biological sex
yes,
is, when
yes,
born, you either
yes,
generally, it's a male or a female.
yes.
So, but there, even with that, there's now a spectrum. Is that right?
Yes. There's chromosomal. So there's different levels, and I'm not a specialist in this, so I might mess some of it up. But there's the chromosomes we have. There's also the primary sex characteristics, which is the ovaries, the testes. There's the secondary characteristics, which are things like facial hair and other hormonal things that happen to us. And all along the way, there's ways in which sex doesn't come out in the boxes we think. So there's not just XX and XY. There's XXY. There's all kinds of other things. There are people who are, on the surface, you'd say that's a female. Primary sex characteristics, ovaries, breast. Ooh, hold on, my phone rang in my ear. Unfiltered. And so there's, they have ovaries, they have breasts, they have all the characteristics of female, but then you look at their chromosomes and they're XY. And so if we look at that biologically, how can we then say then in terms of how we feel in our bodies as our identity is binary at all? Because gender is more about, okay, do I feel female? Do I feel male? Yeah, I feel both. And we all have masculine and feminine in us, all of us.
Yes.
But sometimes it's really in our bodies too. And so that was where I was at, is feeling like I'm a walking paradox.
So I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes when you were at school and you were just hitting puberty, and all of these things were probably now.
Hold on, I can't hear you.
Oh, hold on. Can you hear me?
One sec. Try again.
Can you hear me?
Oh, my ear pods.
No. Hear me? Still can't hear me?
Now I can hear you. Try again.
Good.
Yeah, so apparently when your phone rings, it gets rid of your ear pod. So apologies for the cut. So go back to what you were talking about. I'm so sorry.
That's fine. I was just trying to put myself in your shoes as a young Erin, just hitting puberty at school. Talk us through what that was like. I mean, you mentioned bullying earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just curious to know how it was for you at school, where perhaps you were confused internally about what was going on, in your body, in your mind, and how you felt, but equally the perception of other people and how they were treating you. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. It was more, I think at the level of I didn't look like a girl in some senses. I did have long hair. I didn't cut my long hair until I was 25 ish. Um, but yeah, I liked to be very tomboyish. And um, I remember there was, so my bus stop, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and I lived in this sort of like part of the town that was sort of deserty. And this other girl was at my bus stop, and the bus stop was right next to my house, and she would come every day and she would take my hair tie from me. She would throw things from my backpack off into the desert, where there's cacti and all that. She would go around telling other people at school that I liked them. I had people come up to me and call me, whatever kind of more of the like lesbian slurs, dyke, that kind of stuff. Um, but and then I mean there were guys who said things too. I can't remember all of what they said, but I just remember them making fun of what I wore. And I had a few friends, but it was starting to really hit home 6th, 7th grade that wait, I'm different. Something's different. There's something not okay with who I am in the societal eye. And so that started a real abandonment of myself. I don't think I've ever said that, but that's really where it started is I spent, it was such a stark contrast to what my parents, did for me growing up and in terms of really letting me be and not asking me to fit into any societal mold. And I think that, behind the scenes, they were worried. I've at least heard this. My dad's no longer here with us, but my mom and I have talked. And I think my aunts and uncles and my parents were worried about how I was going to move through society. In terms of just my tomboyness, like we weren't even thinking about gender. And I keep going back to tomboy. They are two different things, but that was what was on the surface at that point, right? And so yeah, I started to abandon myself. And I remember middle school, I finally got my first pair of jeans because I used to wear sweatpants. I used to wear like really outlandish clothes. And then, all through high school trying to figure out, well, how do I do this thing called girl? And trying on things like makeup that didn't feel right to me. And at some point I started highlighting my hair with blonde highlights because that was more feminine. And, it also translated into, well, let me make sure I always have some sort of boy that I'm, fawning over because, again, sex and gender or sexuality and gender were kind of this weird muddle for me. And I just remember so excitedly coming to now. I went to University of Michigan for college. It was 2,000 miles away from home. And I had so many friends who were staying in state going to college. And I said, for so many reasons, I said, I'm not staying here. I have to start over. And I found myself in this amazing little college in University of Michigan that was all people who were just doing them. And so that was a great place for me to start really exploring who I was. And it still took me till like middle of college to come out as not straight. And then it took me even longer years to really go, oh wait, there's this additional layer. And it took me a long time because it was already coming out as gay. And at the time, sort of bisexual was what I came out as. Coming out as gay in 2004 was still really hard. I mean, it was not allowed in the United States. The state of Michigan had banned gay marriage. I just even getting to that place, it was like, really another thing I have to come out about.
But how aware were you of all these different, let's call it labels. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not labels, but they are sort of labels, aren't they? Were you starting to research these things? Did you have medical advice, support? How was that process for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I knew somebody in college who had had top surgery. And I remember looking at them and thinking, ooh, that doesn't look good. So I'm not going to do that. And so I had the curiosity in college and then shut it down immediately. Um, and what was interesting is at the time I went to social work school for a year after college and was interning at the LGBT office at University of Michigan. And that's where I met this trans guy who became a really good friend of mine. And he was teaching these workshops on gender, which then he handed the torch over to me to start teaching them. And so in order to teach them, I had to really dive in and learn. And I moved to San Diego after that with my girlfriend at the time, and I started teaching gender workshops at the community's LGBT center. And so I had to continue my learning. But all the while, what was so interesting is I kept saying, I'm teaching gender, but this isn't me.
Hmm.
This is not about my story, because I just wasn't quite ready to grapple with my own. It was hard enough to come out. I just did not want to accept that there might be something else. And so I taught those workshops. I have a very dear friend who I met during those workshops, who then went all the way from exploring non-binary and is now transitioned. But it took me, I still years, and I kept saying, I don't want another thing. I just don't want another thing that sets me apart. I don't want society to look at me weird. Even cutting my hair short was a big thing, because now I can't pass as straight, not just pass as female, right? Long hair really got me to, if I needed to be safe somewhere, I could be. But now with the short hair and the leaning more into the masculine side of my expression was, already causing me to stand out in places. And so I just sort of dipped my toe in, but I kept getting these nudges and just kept getting these more nudges. And I kept looking at my body and going, this is not my body. And so I was in grad school in Austin, Texas, and I first heard about non-binary about 2006. And then it was 2012 or 2013, that I said, ooh, okay, maybe I'll look into surgery. And what I did was I went to normal plastic surgeons thinking, I'm not going to get everything removed. That's just too much. Society will just look on me like I am a fucking freak. Excuse my language, but that was what I was telling myself. And so I went to these plastic surgeons and said, I just want a reduction. And one of the plastic surgeons said, yeah, I can probably do that. I can take you down to an A cup. It won't look good, but I can do that. And I'm thinking about my friend that I knew in college, right? That it didn't look good. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe. And then I went to another plastic surgeon, and she said, well, I can't do what you want because I have an aesthetic that I'll adhere to. Mind you, neither of these people were at all specializing in gender affirming surgeries, right? They were just typical plastic surgeons. And so I said, you know what? No, I'm not ready. I don't want to do this. I'm definitely not going in just for a minor reduction. I don't want to do something that looks, I was almost willing to do the one that would look bad because it was that important to me, but I went, I'm not ready. So I just let it sit, and I let it sit. I moved to San Francisco, kept letting it sit. I was working at Facebook at the time. I could have done, they had a wonderful health insurance policy that I could have done it. Still didn't do it. I kept sitting and I kept sitting because it just kept saying to myself, well, I don't know what society will think. And what if I don't want this? What if I go under the knife and I look down and I think, you really are a fucking freak. Right. So I was worried about society, and I was worried about myself and what I would think of myself. And so I went back and forth for years on, okay, well, am I getting a reduction? Am I getting completely, removed? Am I doing nothing? And it was exhausting. And it just made it so much easier just to stay, right? Just to do nothing and to continue hating my body and continue looking down at my body and going, this isn't right. It was 2017 when I finally said, I'm on the edge. Like the fear of what if I do had been strong, right? And now the fear of what if I don't was getting stronger. And what I like to talk about with people is you gotta know when the fear of what if I don't gets stronger than the fear of what if I do, because then that means you gotta go do it. And I ended up working with a coach at the time, totally on something else, and burnout really. And she said, come down to Mexico. I have this retreat. I think you'd really get some clarity there. And I said, no. The retreat was straight women, identified women. Like, what is someone who's grappling with non-binary and not straight going to do with women who are, and most of them in their 40s and older? I'm thinking, that's the last place I want to go. I'm going to be ostracized. And she said, no, trust me. These are really wonderful people. Come down to Mexico. So I followed my gut, which said go down to Mexico, and spent a week with them at this retreat deciding I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do. And it was a great place for me to be because one of my fears was having a bathing suit on. What are you going to do as a mostly female person in terms of sex characteristics on a beach? And so I got to sit on a beach and think about, well, what do I want? Do I want to wear a bra for the rest of my life, even if it's a smaller one? Do I want to possibly take a shirt off? Do I want to wear a surfing shirt? What do I want to do? And at some point, this coach asked me something around the lines of, I can't remember her exact words, but it was something around like, who are you gonna please, society or yourself? Or who are you going to choose? And I kept coming back to society. And she said, when are you going to choose yourself? And those 14 other straight white, mostly white women said, we love you. We choose you. And they became my champions. They're some of my best friends to this day. And they were the ones who really said, you are a human and you are an amazing human. F society, go choose you. And so I came home from that retreat and made an appointment right away. And that's how surgery happened. So that's a long-winded story about how I got to here.
That's amazing. And I think you mentioned you'd abandoned yourself somewhere along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So in Mexico, did you find you?
I started to. Yeah. And through my coach, I started to. And I had abandoned me. I had abandoned my body. For other reasons, was also really disconnected. And what's so sad to me now is that it's sad. It's sad, but like not in a regretting way. I'm really glad my story ended up being what it is. But my body contains so much wisdom, in ways I had never imagined. And now that I'm connected with it, I can tap that wisdom. I really can feel things like I know that deep down when I'm supposed to go do something because I can feel it in my body. There's an intuitive or soul level thing going on there. But when I was so detached, I was neck up all the time. And now I look at me and I feel me. I can feel my body moving through the world in ways that are more powerful. It's just so hard to describe for people who haven't experienced it. But just imagine not feeling like you're in your body.
So kind of this freedom, your spirit is just free.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got out of surgery and I took my first picture, someone said, this is how we've always seen you. I can't believe you had a chest.
That's such a powerful statement that sometimes, and I've seen this with other things, obviously in life, we generally have a perception of how people see us, which is often flawed. because
Yes.
really that's what we've taught ourselves to believe people see us. It's
Yes.
only when we give ourselves permission to be who we are, we suddenly realize that actually no one's surprised, that they probably always saw us that way, but they thought we wanted them to see us in a different way. It's very convoluted, I know, but that's
Yes.
how life is. And I think so when you were going through this long process of, not being sure and, not feeling right, but not knowing what the right thing to do was, who did you turn to? Did you have people in your close family or, friends circle that supported you?
In the middle of the decision process, so thinking back, I took you on a timeline. I went to Michigan, and then I was in San Diego, then Texas, then San Francisco. Um, I talked a little bit with my girlfriend in San Diego, but we are no longer together. But really, my now wife was a big support. That's why I was trying to figure out the timeline of when I went to see plastic surgeons, because I knew she went with me. And I'm like, when did we meet? Um, she was just big champion for me, and for years kept, saying, I I can't love a part of your body that you don't love, and wanting me, to do what was best for me, and, you know, supporting every step of the way, what I wanted and needed. And then my wife's family was really, really supportive. My family has been supportive. I think it was a little bit of a shock, because I think, you think about, people in my parents. My mom is in her 70s, her husband's in his 80s. Like, they're not, this is new stuff. And so just sort of grappling with it and trying to understand it. But my mom has always been super supportive of me. And so they've been wonderful. My mother-in-law, my mom is now in a wheelchair, and so she couldn't come visit me during my surgery. Actually, she was really, really unable at that point. And so my mother-in-law came out during my surgery and took care of me, and, helped my wife. And definitely those women from the retreat have been super supportive. They were texting me the whole way. So I've had a ton of support, and it's been almost shocking in some ways, because it's wonderful to see how far society has come since 2004, when, here I was terrified to tell people I was gay, even though I could walk around the streets passing as straight, and realizing that there were people I could lose by doing that. And then, what, 10, 15 years later, everybody is supporting me on this gender stuff. I've not had a single person in my world outwardly say anything negative to me, and I haven't had any outward harassment. One of the things that was so beautiful to learn is I was worried about going into restrooms. Right, that's a huge thing, because even, with the short hair, I at times could at least point to my chest, and people go, oh, okay. Right. I don't get harassed any more often. I don't get harassed very often, but I don't get harassed any more often than I used to. Most people don't notice.
So this is sort of a naive question to ask. So, obviously when you're non-binary, what does that actually mean in terms of when you have to slot into one of the, either the male toilets or the female? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, if there's an all gender restroom, that's my preference. And in fact, that was something that I was working on at my last job at Microsoft, is to get every building an all gender restroom, because that is absolutely the safest. And usually those are single stall, right? There's so there's some privacy. So in the places that there's one of those, I will go there. In the absence of an all gender restroom, I tend to go towards the women's room, because it's safer, much safer. But it's also still a thing. So during COVID, my wife and I we live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my parents have a summer home about 3.5 hours from us, but it's up in a much more rural part of Michigan, much more conservative area. And so when we drive up there, we usually make a stop for gas and to use the restroom. And now with a mask on, I look even more male. And so what we have done is my wife will actually come into the restroom with me to make sure I feel okay. And I do have places where I have said, you know what, I'm not going to use the restroom here. I'm not safe. I may be safe. I don't know, but I am constantly vigilant too. Where in the US am I? Am I going to be in a place that's safe? I'm prepared for things to happen. I remember working at Facebook one day, walking into the women's restroom, and there was a woman in there who ran out of the bathroom thinking she was in the wrong restroom.
Oh.
And the way she looked at me was just it was devastating, and I had to just say, look, this is gonna be what it's gonna be. And what I did was I allowed myself to feel the pain, because I think it's unhealthy to just say, oh, it's okay, I'm gonna bust through this and put on my brave armor. No, I allowed myself to feel the pain and know that I was okay. It was going to happen.
And
Keep
that kind
going.
of reaction, do you find that it comes from a place of not knowing, not understanding, rather than sort of, transphobia or,
Yeah.
sort of homophobia or whatever it is?
I think it's mostly not understanding. And most of the time that I get, I've had a few different incidents that I can think about, but the majority of them, the person is looking at themselves like, did I step into the wrong restroom? Which is kind of interesting, that the automatic assumption is that they're wrong. um, but then, yeah, a lot of it's not understanding. This time last year, I flew down to Mexico again. I was at the same place. The coach that I was working with is now a friend of mine, and we were hosting this queer retreat. And I was in the Mexico City airport, and Mexico City's airport restrooms have attendants at every door. And I have not once, I've been now through Mexico City's airport several times. I have not once walked into a restroom without them questioning me. Because every time I walk in, they want to say, this is for ladies, right? And I know, thankfully, Spanish, and I can communicate. And I say, soy mujer, and they kind of look at me funny and let me pass. But it's very clear it's not transphobia. It is, they have not seen someone like me walk into a women's restroom.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's some understanding and compassion that comes along for me with people's questioning. And I'm sure there are places where transphobia exists, and I know the other people who've experienced it. So I'm grateful that at this point in my life, I haven't faced it. I'm also aware I'm going to keep myself out of situations where I could be in harm. I'm not going to travel to certain countries where I could be in harm's way. I'm not going to go into restrooms in locations where I'm in harm's way. I'm going to use resources like my wife when I need to. And I'd rather over rotate towards caution than not.
And in terms of, the how companies, for example, like, your previous employer, or even just the general public, what things do you think need to be done for people to become more aware, maybe have greater understanding of what the different, situations might be?
Yeah, I think a really big start is Allgender restrooms.
Yeah.
That captures everyone, not just people who don't identify. It's not that you're only allowed in the all gender restroom if you're non-binary. I think that's a big start. And I think there's everything from putting in your email signature your pronouns and not making assumptions, because there are people in the non-binary world that if you would to like, non-binary doesn't have a particular look to it, quote unquote, right? So I am someone who is more in the androgynous. You can see the female and you can see the male in me, but I know some people who identify as non-binary who you would look at them and think, oh no, that's just, a woman. And I know some people on the other side who, oh no, that's just a man. And so getting rid of assumptions, right? And having everybody identify pronouns that they use is really, I think, important to breaking down assumptions, because it's easy to now, because our brains love to categorize. That's what a lot of what this stems from. Our brain looks at, I look at you and I want certainty. I want to know I'm safe. And so one of the ways I want to know I'm safe is looking at, well, okay, you appear to be a woman, right? You appear to be, around my age. And, I look at, we look at color of skin, or, ethnic heritage. I hear your voice. I think, okay, you must be British. All these things go through our head to categorize for us to be safe. And so it's really easy to get in this habit of, well, okay, well, let me just categorize non-binary as a particular type too. And that's not true. And so the more we can break down all of our assumptions, not just on gender, and start getting to know the unique blend of humans, the better. And I think there's certainly more diversity training that can be done. I think diversity training is a really hard concept that not very many people are doing well, but we need more of it and better of it. And I think people need to be sharing their stories and asking for what they need, because what I need is very different than some of my other, non-binary friends. And what I need is very different as a non-binary person than, say, a trans person. And so I think we need to just learn all about these different spectrums of humanity.
Yeah, and schools need to start teaching this, don't they?
Yes.
From an
Yes.
early age, because then what you faced, when you were in middle school, hopefully becomes less of a sort of prevalent thing. I mean,
Yes.
kids can be cruel anyway.
Yes.
Children are so cruel anyway, and then you kind of make it even worse when you have mix in with that the fact that they don't understand and they're not aware of all these different complexities. So I want to ask you, what's been the most rewarding thing for you since you found yourself and since you took that big step of getting surgery done?
I'd say it unlocked so much more depth of understanding of who I am. There's so many. I don't know how to articulate this well yet, but um, the being in alignment is huge. But then also noticing how my ability to understand myself and my gender and be fluid with some of the things around my gender, because there are some days I've worn a dress, not recently, but being able to be fluid with my gender also has allowed me to be fluid with other identities and really look at, okay, who am I right now, and what are the qualities that I want to play with, and what do I want to try on. And I just find the more and more I get to know myself, obviously, the more fun I'm having. The more I love dancing in my body. But then the more I get to know myself, the more I also get really attuned with, what am I here for? And it gets clearer and clearer to me on a daily basis that I'm here to help everybody truly. And it sounds so cliche, but be more them. And I went to summer camp when I was a kid, and it was one of those places where everybody could just really, really be them, no matter who they were. And I have this image of our world like that, like summer camp. And so the most rewarding thing now is the more I get to do me and be me, the more I am able to show up in the world to do the good I want to do. And that's what I help people do with themselves now too, is counterintuitively go inward in order to help outward.
Yeah, I love that. So basically, you've done the work of finding your truth and being you. So
Yes.
is it that much easier now to go and help others to do the same?
Yes. And I ask myself, I love the word truth, because I think truth is a journey. And it's like I broke down this wall, and now I just get to see what more of my truth is available each day.
Yeah.
What more truth can I find? And it's just, now the layers are there, and I'm just, everything is so much more accessible being in my body.
I also think one of the things that I saw on your Facebook post, your your thing about, the beginner's mindset and, being willing to reinvent yourself. And it
Yes.
feels like you kind of did that a little bit. You've subtly reinvented, um, how you present yourself to the world, if nothing else. Maybe you haven't changed who you are within. So tell me a little bit more about that. How do you bring that sort of spirit of reinvention into your everyday life?
I mean, I think that that's such a great question. So the part of the non-binary identity that's so fascinating, right, is that it's not that I am fixed between male and female, like right here, right? There's not these two poles and I'm right in the center. It's like I'm fluidly moving. And
Yeah.
some days I am really leaning into that masculine and some days into that feminine. All of us are doing that, but I'm more aware of it because it's such a huge part of me. But in doing that, what I recognize is, okay, I have male and female in me. So does everybody else. And then so the next leap I made in my head was, well, we all have everything within us. All of the identities are available. And why would we fix to one? We don't have to. Um, and so allowing myself to be fluid in gender allows me to be fluid literally in everything. And it allows me to say, today I'm this and today I'm that. And some people on the outside might say, well, that's capricious, right? You need to figure out who you are. I'm like, no, I am so much more permission to explore and find what feels good and to ask myself, is this who I want to be? And is this how I want to be? And it's allowed me to not only just play with my identity, but then also be really fluid in how I operate in the world, in my relationships, in my business. I'm willing now to reinvent on a regular basis because there's nothing wrong with it. Every time I reinvent, I'm just getting to know myself better. I'm getting more and more truth. And in my business, I'm getting more and more clarity about what I'm up to. And so I almost find these moments of, I got to shift everything to be really exciting.
I love that. So I have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
I want to imagine that you are many, many years from now and you have continued to reinvent and you've reached a point in your life where you feel like, yes, my work is done and my time on this earth is coming to its end, but I'm happy and I'm fulfilled. At that point, I want you to tell me, how would you like to be remembered? What's the legacy that you want to leave behind?
Such a fantastic question. It's so funny as you were talking about, my work is done. What really hit me is like, well, no, it's not going to ever be done. um, I'm here to do it. I really want to be remembered as a stand for full, authentic expression and fluidity of expression for everyone. I really strong. I love these words I'm playing with right now. Who knows? I reinvent myself all the time, but really authentic, inclusive, and equitable really strike me because authentic is about the individual level. And when we're all authentic, we can be more inclusive. And when we're more inclusive, we can create the more equitable society, right? And so I want to be known for that one person at a time stand for everyone to be themselves and how that ladders up to how we behave as communities, as cultures, as societies.
I love that. I'm such a huge fan of flow, as
Yeah.
you go with the flow. But yeah, fluidity, finding your flow is such a big part of discovering who we are and who we're meant to be. I love that. And
Yeah.
were you going to say something?
I was going to say, and I hope they don't describe me in any terms because I hope that I am one of those people that they'd say, well, in order to describe Erin, you'd have to, what age? 35, 37, 45, because I'm one of those people that's shifting all the time.
Yeah. And so my final question is, what is your definition of a fulfilled life?
Mm. It's so interesting. I'm not sure I have articulated this into words because when you say fulfilled, like what happens is I feel something in my sternum and there's a feeling but not words. Um I think it's one that is absolutely full of joy and pleasure. And sometimes the biggest joy and biggest pleasure is going out and doing impactful work in the world. But a fulfilled life is the one where, um, and I'm spitballing here, it's the one where you don't abandon yourself. It's the one where you choose yourself in each and every moment, and counterintuitively, choosing yourself actually turns into bringing about whatever you want to see in the world. But choosing yourself really is the big thing.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I saw something, and I'm probably going to get the quote wrong, by Simon Sinek, saying that happiness is when you focus on you, fulfillment is when you focus on others, or something like that.
Yeah.
And actually, when you find your own happiness, it's so much easier to go out there and serve, at your best,
Yeah.
your best level, right? Because
Yeah.
you've served yourself well, and now your oxygen mask analogy on the plane, you're
Yes.
ready to go and help others. Well, Erin, it's
Absolutely.
been absolutely fascinating. And listen, last question is for people like me who are still learning about, the whole non-binary situation. So how do you want people to address you? What's
Yeah. So I am, speaking of fluidity. For a long time, I was very resistant to any other pronouns besides she and her. But right now, I am trying on they, them for size. And one of the great things is that because I have a PhD, I don't have to worry about Miss or Mister. I go by doctor. So I've always been gender free with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
they, them is how I am currently um, being referred to. And I will also, I was trying to think if I have the name of this book, but there's a book I just got for the holidays on gender that's title is escaping me, but I will send you a message on it. It's a great resource, and it's all about the intersectionality of our identity. So we talked a lot about me today, but like these things play out very differently in Black communities, in Latinx communities, in younger generations, older generations. Like we can't take any of these things in isolation because our white supremacist patriarchy affects each person's unique blend differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Erin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank
And
you.
I wish you every success. And I'm going to look forward to you fluidly reinventing yourself.
Me too. I'm looking forward to who I'm going to be tomorrow and 2 days from now and 10 years from now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.